All right, good morning, everyone. This open meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. We'll call to order at 10:02. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. This meeting is being recorded. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all phones and devices. And let's see, ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. We are using Zoom for this meeting, which allows the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. The chair can request that members of the public provide their names for purposes of keeping accurate minutes of the meeting. Attendees can register using the link on the agenda. And let's see, and raise your hand when you want to indicate that you wish to speak. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. The chair will call on those who have raised their hands in the order in which they were raised. All questions should be directed through the chair. If you're not able to participate in the remote meeting, you may also submit comments to Leah Hill, the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, and request that they be read into the meeting record. Her email is lhill@nantucket-ma.gov. I am Mary Longacre, Chair of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Gary Beller.
Here.
Sarah Boyce is not able to join us right away this morning. Carl Borchert.
Here.
Peter Brace said a note he was not able to join us. Matt Fee, I think, is here. Matt's waving, but it looks like audio might be a challenge. He's in a car.
I'm here.
Oh, good. Thank you, Matt. Rachel Freeman.
Here.
Thank you, Rachel. Ian Golding said he would not be able to join this morning. Jen Carberg.
Here.
I do not see Christy Kickham at this time. Joanna Roach.
Here.
And Mary Longacre. Okay. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Leah Hill.
Here.
And Vince Murphy.
Here.
And we also have Arnold Robinson joining us from Fuss & O'Neill. Arnold, good morning.
Hey, good morning. I'm here.
And we're hoping to have Kate Michaud, the town manager of Warren, Rhode Island, join us as well, but I do not see her yet.
She has been called to testify up at the State House.
Oh, well, I'm sure she would rather be with us. But I'm sorry, we'll miss her. Okay. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, question, or motion. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself, and each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by a roll call vote. All right, so turning to the first item on our agenda, discussion with Arnold Robinson, Associate Regional Planning Director at Fuss & O'Neill, regarding the Market to Metacom Climate Resilience and Economic Development Plan in Warren, Rhode Island. We did provide a website for the project in the agenda. Arnold, would you start with just a brief description of the problem that was identified that you were trying to solve with this? And then we'll
Sure. So the town of Warren, Rhode Island lies at the head of Narragansett Bay, and it is the lowest lying community in Rhode Island. Within the community itself, there's one neighborhood, the Market Street neighborhood, which is both a highly dense residential neighborhood home to several industries and businesses, but also is a regional transportation network hub. And it is especially low lying and is currently experiencing inundation on those roadways at spring tides, never mind storm events. So we got funding from US EPA, did a study that looked at relocation or options for treatment within that area, but at the same time also looking at where that density could be relocated to. And we have another corridor in town called Metacom Avenue, which is that. So that was a 2-year process, and I was the project manager for Fuss & O'Neill.
Great. So we are obviously on Nantucket threatened in low-lying areas by sea level rise and flooding from perhaps increased storm activity. So this sounds very interesting to think about what was some of the public outreach that you did, what was the public's reaction to relocating, and also in the destination area, what was their concern and reaction to receiving the relocation?
So I think that we used a methodology for doing our outreach, which we called sort of incremental education. That too often we had found in Rhode Island that communities did their planning work. They came up with what their options were. They picked a preferred option, and then they sort of involved the public and said, "Hey, we're done. Here's the pathway we should all go down." Because of that, they would often hit resistance. That had happened with some projects, even local projects in Warren. So Bob Ruley, who was the planner at the time, he's since moved to another community where he's the head of planning. He and I came up with a methodology where we did 3 very distinct workshops. The first one was a simple exposition of existing conditions and then listening. So we, and I've got images that I can show if the committee wants to see them, but one of the keys was, as a methodology, sharing data in a graphic and compelling way so that folks could understand what was going to be happening with sea level rise and storm event within the areas. That was a big part of how we reached out to people and how we began to convince people, because once the first session probably had about 80 attendees, people walked away with that saying, well, what are we going to do about this? I'm thrilled to know more, but now what? And we said, come back in 6 more weeks. And in 6 weeks, we had worked on our alternatives analysis, including a no-build analysis. If you do nothing, here's what happens. Here's who's impacted. We did that. We had another 80 people at that second session, got their feedback. And what was wonderful about that was there was clear consensus on a direction to go in. So it was incremental engagement, incremental education, but looping in their feedback. And they've selected a preferred alternative, and they're now moving into action. In Market Street, to your question, Mary, about how people reacted to that, we've had the full range. We've had people who came to us at the end of the first session saying, where do I sign up for a voluntary buyout program? And then we've had other people who've said, you're carrying me out of my house feet first. I don't believe in this stuff. And that was it. And the point of our process with them was not to engage in a debate. It was to assess, educate, and then take the early adopters in. On the Metacom Avenue piece, which is the densification relocation area, we've had a lot of enthusiasm because that is an area that is an underperforming retail area. And basically, it's the high ground. It has good infrastructure, but not great infrastructure. All the property owners, or many of the property owners that we have talked with, have been, I would love you to upzone me. I would love to see mixed use development. We would love to see a better walking, biking, riding, transit environment in this corridor, which is sort of a 1972, strip mall environment. So that's had a lot of very positive response from the business community and property owners. Great,
thank you, Arno. For good or ill, we do not have any 1972 strip mall corridors in Nantucket. So I'm not wishing for one, but I envy you the easy solution. And maybe it wasn't easy, but an opportunity to be taken advantage of nonetheless. So continuing on that theme of relocation, you have an interesting method of paying for some of this work. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, there's a couple different methods, and so like anything, we have set when I say we, I'm also going to be speaking about the town's actions, because policy is now the follow-on of what's going to happen. So a couple of different things are happening. The first is that the early money in is the hardest to get, and so we've been lucky to have our federal delegation on board early for this. They have brought some good significant funding for the feasibility and then the engineering side of things. And that's allowed us to make the argument more strongly. So I think we're going to see, one way or another, FEMA dollars come into this for relocation, because FEMA has good programs. BRIC is one example, where they would rather pay for proactive relocation or proactive adaptation rather than paying the damages on the back end after a storm event or after any kind of catastrophic event. But one of the things that I would highlight is that the town is in the midst of and is not complete with setting up the legal institute by which you can do a voluntary buyout program. That's going to be a huge part of this project. And so that is one of the first work actions we recommended, and the town is now working on. You've got to set up the armature by which you can negotiate those purchases, by which you can clear those sites, by which you can restore wetlands and receive the dollars, whether it's a federal, state, funding program to go ahead and do that. But the third funding pool that can come in to do that is tax incremental financing. And so that's a pretty well-established program here in Rhode Island and of course across the country. And the future redevelopment of Metacom Avenue with the rezoning will increase the annual tax income in that area by about threefold. And that's just conservative on the couple of sites we've planned on. And those additional annual tax dollars can go to service debt. And so you can bond for a buyout program. You can use that local bonding authority to match your federal and state funding sources, which require often a painful match. It's the hardest money to come up with is the municipal money. So the TIF program is another legal structure that the town is getting rolling because you have to put that in place. A TIF requires the state legislative action to go into place. But again, we're looking at a 20-30 year horizon line. These 2 years right now, we are setting up these legal structures. We're applying for those early federal dollars, and we're setting up our programs. But we already have our first property in the Market Street area that has suffered repetitive flood loss. That owner has walked away from the property. The town is now going through a tax sale process. They're going to demolish that, and they're going to use that to open up one of the channels which causes flooding. So I think that's our sort of canary in the coal mine property that tells us this will be what we use in the Market Street area as a method. This happens to be a tax sale, but I think we're going to see more property owners come to us on the buyout side.
So Arnold, are you buying out only the properties on Market Street, the vulnerable properties? Or are you also having to buy the properties on Metacom in order to redevelop them?
No, Metacom Avenue is very much left to the private sector. We want to enable through zoning and infrastructure improvements a higher density and a mixed use pattern of development. It'll be a form-based code if folks are familiar with that. It is not a Euclidean zoning that's based on single land uses segregated into zones. Instead, it's based on the form of the buildings, the density, the height, as a performance basis. So for instance, right now, most of the streets on buildings on Metacom Avenue are set at the full back of the lot, and they leave this giant sort of open desert of parking in the front. New form-based code will essentially have those buildings up at the street edge with parking either underneath or behind. And so that will be one piece of it, is that form-based code. But embedded in that is the ability to develop more density in this area of town. And Warren, thankfully, has not yet had the backlash reaction that often happens when we have the density word. That is often what freaks people out. Instead, we've had a lot of positive to it, saying we need a place for more housing development. We need a place where kids who grow up in town who can't afford to buy a house can have an apartment and still stay in the same town as their family. So that has had a lot of positive feedback.
And then so that the owners who are leaving Market Street are not necessarily transferring to equivalent housing on Metacom.
No, the way we framed it and the way the town adopted this has been very much because this is a 20 to 30 year transition. And I'll just show it. May I share screen and share an image for a second?
Yes, please. And Leah, whatever we need to do to make that happen.
Great. Let me just share with you. There we go. So, all right. Are you all seeing that? It should be a title screen. Super. So I'm into the recommendations portion of our presentation that we use. And this is on the website. You guys can watch the video of this. You can see the full PDF of the presentation. But it's when we got to our phase 3 workshop, this was the sort of the phased relocation scenario. And so really the key here is that the 4 full phases, if we get to 4 full phases, is a 50 to 70 year horizon line. And with buyouts are not across the entire district. They start almost in a concentric circle way with those properties that are most in danger of repetitive flooding and storm damage. You don't start with the stuff that is higher ground that's really only going to face a 500-year storm. You start with those that are going to face a 10-year storm damage. So I'll walk you through what that looks like. So for instance, this is the Market Street project area. And just to orient folks on this image on the left, the Belcher Cove comes in from the north. This is a estuarine river, and it flows over to the east. And then this is our Market Street area that's grayed out. But everything north of this red line is what we call phase 1. It is those properties that directly front onto Market Street. They are facing flood events already right now. And this is for that buyout period between 2025 and 2035. So the town works sequentially to target these properties. And when I say target, it is still voluntary. It is not using eminent domain. It is basically saying to folks, if you would like to be bought out, we will buy you out at an appraised market value. And we will remove that property and restore it to a flat surface, ideally, if we're close enough to it, functional wetland, to increase our flood storage capacity as well. And one of the things that's sort of going into our hands here on this is that many property owners over here cannot get flood insurance anymore, or have really high flood insurance costs if they want to retain these properties. So that's a huge factor. We are seeing some cash sales, in which case it's not required, but there are folks who are interested in this zone. And there's a lot of math that goes behind that very simple table on your right-hand side, because again, we needed to make this digestible to a very big audience. But essentially, there are 58 properties. There are 31 buildings. The cost to do this is about $15 million. And that includes acquisition, demolition, utility removal, site clearing, and restoration as part of that work. So that's phase 1, which takes us through a 10-year period. But if you amortize that out over, now we have not adjusted for inflation, by the way, but $15 million over 10 years is not ridiculous in terms of avoiding flood hazard. And then I'm not going to take you through everything here, but there's a phase 2. These are all topographically accurate and flood-based risk accurate to where we see flooding taking place based on the NOAA data. And so we walk this through. This would be the phase 2 zone for buyouts, and then phase 3 and so forth for phase 4. So it gets us sort of through that, entire period. So that's sort of, when we talk about that, to just directly answer your question, Mary, that's sort of our process here, is a sequenced voluntary buyout program.
Right. And then those property owners are simply leaving the area, not required to or tied to a new
Not at all.
resident.
Yeah. So to get back to your core question, we recognize that some folks may want to, if a new building is developed on Metacom Avenue, they may be at the point in their life where they want to do that. Excuse me one second. And that kind of living might fit. You might have someone else who says, I want another house in Warren. They're going to sell at the market value, and then they can go take those dollars and sort of go wherever they want.
Right. And so there would be many reasons that people would choose to take advantage of the program, and then they still have as many options as someone else.
Yes.
Not in the area for where.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Well, questions from commissioners at this point. We've had an introduction to the program. Yes, Matt.
Question: Did you guys consider rights to let the new development pay for this?
I'm sorry, Matt, I
Yeah.
lost part of that question on the audio.
Did you consider TDRs, transfer of development rights, and having Metacom buy out Market Street rather than put it on the taxpayers?
We did, and the TDR legislation in Rhode Island there is no strong basis for us to build one off of. That's failed a couple of times from a state standpoint. We did look at transfer development rights, And we felt we were better off up zoning in the Metacom area and using the TIF. Now, that may change over time, but TDRs haven't been a big tradition in the state.
Arnold, would you talk a little bit more about, excuse me, my turn to cough, about the TIF, the tax increment financing, if I remember that acronym
Yep.
correctly?
Yeah, so let me just go to Metacom for a second. And so basically, we did a full analysis of what existing property values are, square footages, land uses, everything on Metacom Avenue. And this is the sort of corridor we're looking at here. And then we developed out what those, based on a form-based code that the town officials we met with were comfortable with from a density standpoint and what the infrastructure could support. We did a full build-out scenario, and it's very much sort of new urbanist. Fits the characters of the surrounding neighborhoods that fit into it, and provides sort of, transition kinds of buildings of townhouse apartments at the edges, and then mixed use higher density buildings up at the front edges. And so because one of the keys to a TIF is to be able to effectively model what your build out's going to be and what it's going to generate for tax dollars. So this gives you a good example. This is a site called the Job Lot site, which is a pretty typical strip mall. And this is it reconfigured with a higher density, still functions from a parking perspective, still functions from a utilities perspective. And we can, based on existing tax rates, for developed properties, forecast what that tax income generation is going to be. And then we figured out what that could support for a funding side of things for your TIF buyouts over time. So that's part of the piece now that the town is working with its attorneys and their specialist firms who work on tax incremental financing. To set up that structure so that the town has that in place, and that they're going to propose their legislation that'll go up to the General Assembly at some point and hopefully get passed. And then they'll be able to use that at the same time as they're redeveloping the Metacom Avenue corridor. I do want to add too that a big part of this has been outreach to these private parcel owners to let them know what's coming down the pike in terms of increases to density, the vision for new zoning, and what it can be. We didn't. One thing that was very important was you'll notice that down here on this corner there's a garage, an auto service garage, and here there's an existing restaurant. Everything else is under the ownership of the folks who own the Campus Plaza piece. We left those existing parcels as is. Ideally, they would get redeveloped because there's real opportunities for some density, but also holding a corner like this from an urban design perspective is critical. But we didn't want to just sort of willy-nilly say to a parcel owner who wasn't interested, hey, we're just going to show your site redeveloped. We left it as is. If later on, over the course of the next 10 years, that person joins a redevelopment effort, wonderful. But we didn't want to distract from where there was willing partnership by sort of fighting uphill against a property owner who wasn't into it yet.
All right, so we'll get to Matt's question in a second, but I want to make sure I understand how this works. So right now, the zoning does not allow this redevelopment. So there is no potential for increased property values without changing the zoning. Is that correct?
And that is correct. So Rhode Island law requires that your comprehensive plan be updated, and Warren is wrapping up its comp plan update, and you can only tune up your zoning to match your comp plan vision once your comp plan is in place. So the comp plan, once that is passed, and that's looking like it's going to be August of this year, then the zoning will be tuned up to match the comp plan, and that zoning will include both the form-based code for the physical built environment, but also the density embedded within it. So I would think we'd see a zone change by the end of this calendar year.
And so how does this actually tie to the Market Street buyout? I mean, it seems like if you change the zoning first, is there a provision that sets aside the increased tax revenue from the
Absolutely, yeah. So the very reason for the Metacom Avenue, a TIF district needs to be geographically defined with boundaries, and so the Metacom Avenue TIF district would be geographically defined, and it would be programmatically limited to supporting those either buyout activities in the Market Street area or supporting redevelopment infrastructure in Metacom Avenue. I think it's going to end up probably doing both with some kind of a proportion formula, so that, you know, of the income generated through the differential taxes, X percentage can be used for Market Street buyouts, and that's used every year, and then Y percentage can be used for Metacom Avenue. That is typically, and TIFs are if TIFs, for instance, are very often used in downtown redevelopments, and a TIF will be limited in its usage because what folks don't want to see is, hey, we're going to burden this one district, right? Geographically burdened. And then we're going to say that money can disappear into the city's general coffers, right? That's not the point of a TIF. It is a special, targeted use of that tax differential from current unimproved condition to future improved condition, and using that differential to support a particular purpose.
So it really represents, on behalf of the community and the municipality, a commitment to this concept, that the revenues be designated for the purposes.
Exactly. And that follows that commitment, which is in the comprehensive plan. Comp plans in Rhode Island are binding by law. Once you adopt a comp plan, you not only have to true up your zoning as required, but also any land use decisions made that are counter to your comprehensive plan can be challenged in court by any citizen of that municipality. So comp plans really have teeth in Rhode Island.
Great. Thank you, Arnold. Matt, your question?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. When you were doing the TIF, was the finance, did you look at the increased costs you were gonna have from this development? So the school cost, do you need more police? Do you need a bigger school for the people who will be here? And was that baked into your financials projections?
So we were working for Market to Metacom at this broad conceptual level of moving development from one place to the other. There are a couple of follow-on projects that are currently happening. One is the legal development of the TIF language itself. We did do, based on the housing types, some generation of school kids is always the big, lightning rod issue, right, for these kind of things. And we did look at a bunch of districts that are like this in other parts of Rhode Island and Massachusetts that have been developed to see what that typical number is. And so we do have some generation numbers on that. They're very broad across our entire improved properties mapping. But one of the things that did come out of that study, which we did present in that third workshop, is that typically this type of housing model is more geared towards folks who either are empty nesters and looking to sell their home within Warren and want to be in a more apartment style living, or younger folks who are at the beginning of their life, post-collegiate, beginning of a career, and not yet generating kids. So based on the modeling that's been done by other TOD studies, and that's transit-oriented development, which this is somewhat TOD because we have a dedicated bus line here, not train. But our school age generation numbers are lower. But we did run the numbers for fire, police, and then the infrastructure services as part of the concept.
Right. Can I have a follow-up, Mary?
Yes, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, no, because we had it proposed here a number of years ago for a development, but some of that hadn't been done, and then it was supposed to come in and it wasn't. So I think your suggestion to look at everything and have the whole thing at least sort of sketched out is good. Two other questions. What did you consider raising Market Street, and were there any historic buildings, and why didn't you raise it, and were there any historic buildings, and what about those?
Yeah, great question. So just while I go there, my background's historic preservation, and my first gig out of grad school was doing survey on Nantucket for a year, which was really fun. And so yes, we did look at that for Market Street. And so when Leah reached out, I was like, oh my God, Nantucket called. This is awesome. So history was a part of it. Market Street does not have any designated National Register districts. Let me go to my mapping for Market Street. So here's the Market Street zone, and just we're looking at properties flooded here. This also nicely shows the Market Street area as well that's running through the project area. So I got to orient you on transportation a little bit here. So this is a section of Market Street that runs north-south, and it is Rhode Island Route 136. And it connects over to Metacom Avenue, where it continues as Route 136. This was developed in the 1950s as a connector to Providence as these communities were growing from a suburban standpoint. Over here is Route 103, which runs east-west, which is called Child Street. And it's a low-lying roadway, but it's a little more up than this section of Market Street, which runs east-west. So Matt, to your point, Market Street, where it connects over to 136 and goes east-west, and Child Street, Route 103, essentially run perpendicular to each other. So one of the things we did when we did our systems analysis for the transportation systems, Market Street is way lower and is already flooding at spring tides. And we looked at this, and we looked at the areas of buildings here and what would need to be elevated for buildings, because once you elevate a roadway, can you still access the buildings? Do the driveways work? Do the utilities work? How does everything function? So what I think we're going to end up seeing here is that we looked at some best practices nationally for road elevation. And what we said was that if we elevate anything, it's going to be Child Street, right? This Child Street is our east-west evacuation route. It is already higher. It has less inundation from seawater, although it still has the same upland water flow, which is currently moving north. So we'll have to deal with that during storm events. But 103 makes a much better east-west connector than maintaining Market Street does. The only reason to maintain Market is if you're going to continue to service these properties. And that's not one of the long-term goals that the town has. So we did look at that. We've done a lot of work. We have a technical group at Fuss & O'Neill that just works on road elevation projects and looks at sort of best practices and strategic decision making. And so we made the decision, with the town that Child is the way to go, and then maintaining 136's viability north-south is sort of those are the two major moves we have to make. Market, we can let go of. It's not going to inhibit us from a functionality standpoint. So does that sort of answer your question in terms of thinking about elevating it? Oh, and sorry, historic. Market is not part of a National Register district until you get way over here to the west, where it butts up against a National Register historic district, but we're not proposing work within that district. And there are no individually listed properties within this area.
Yeah, thank you. Answered both. Thank you.
Okay.
And I think that was a really helpful analysis too. So thank you, Arnold.
Sure.
We'll go to Gary.
Thank you, Arnold. I think it's a terrific presentation, and I'm really impressed with the fact that the town has got its act together to come up with these plans. Thinking about Nantucket, when I heard you say that for the next 10 years, the cost of the buyout program of Market Street is $15 million. And I started thinking about Nantucket, where the homes on the water average,
Right.
$20 million. I'm trying to figure out whether or not, because of the buyout of the flooded or potentially flooded properties, the actual amount of the payments was substantially lower, or it is just the fact that Rhode Island is not Nantucket and the real estate values are dramatically different. Do you actually have the FEMA money on hand for the first 10 years? I mean, it's only $15 million. Not that you shouldn't. I once learned in my corporate lobbying days, I once learned that you never use the word only in front of million. But $15 million over 10 years seems very, very modest, and it wouldn't do very much for buyouts in Nantucket unless FEMA or could step up. And I'm not sure we could even think about getting that kind of financing from FEMA. But 58 homes for $15 million over 10 years. Is that what your plan says?
No, so this is the no action scenario. So if we go back to, I'm not sure I'm going to find it fast enough, the buyout scenario, that's 31 properties. So it's not the 58. There we go. So 58 properties, 31 buildings, 15 million. It is absolutely a function that Warren is not Nantucket. And I say this with all love. There aren't many places that are as cool as Nantucket. And so those values are completely different. The other thing we've got here is that this is an area that has seen repetitive flooding and repetitive storm events already. Now, realtors don't like to talk about it here in Rhode Island, and especially even in my community in the East Bay. I live in the next town over. It is that is absolutely driving down valuations on these properties. You know, there is a limited pool of buyers who want to wrestle with the flood insurance issues that you have to wrestle, and B, who don't look around the neighborhood and say, oh my gosh, I see all the news coverage about how often this got flooded. We introduced at our second workshop, I'm sure you all know the work of the First Street Foundation and Flood Smart, which is a fantastic interactive website for checking the flood vulnerability of any property in the United States. Anyone doing any due diligence on real estate is going to be looking at properties in this neighborhood with that in mind, and is seeing that inundation is frequent and going to become more frequent. And so I think it is very much had a habit of, as Gary, as you say, of dropping those values. And now that's really hard on those owners who are not going to maybe get out of it, what they've had over time when the market was at a higher point. But it's one of those things that we do want to have them participate in the voluntary buyout program as soon as they can, to both minimize risk, but also to get as much value out of those properties if they choose to shift their value, their equity elsewhere, and move someplace else. So we don't have the FEMA money because, Gary, you asked, do we have that in hand? That is, we've applied for BRIC funding, which is one of the big avenues you can go through. We've also applied for PL 566, which is through National Resource Conservation. We're working on both those programs, but the federal government has, as you probably know, a very long lead time for bringing those things to bear on their projects. Now, I do want to add, though, and this was an important part that we shared with the public, was we didn't want them to sort of say, hey, we're going to do voluntary buyout, wait 10 years, right? We wanted to show, hey, this is actually happening in other parts of the country and has happened successfully. So one of the most analogous for us is Gloucester County, Virginia. So it is topographically very much the same, salt marsh, flooded by storms. Scale is very similar for its first phase. Real estate values were very similar, and this project continues to go on, by the way. This county is aggressively buying out flood risk properties, and as part of a unified plan. So that's important to note. But we also looked at one of the bigger ones that ever happened, a neighborhood that, if you've ever heard the story, that should not have been built, is Onion Creek in Austin, Texas. And essentially 850 buildings. I mean, talk about scale. And now that is an area where, people had been flooded out over and over again, and there had been lots of rescues. And so, this was one where there was a lot of support at the state and federal level for this. And it was about avoiding risk more than anything else. And that has been converted to parkland, flood storage land, recreation space with trails. But there still are some property owners in this zone. This was not a mandatory buyout. Of those 850 that have been removed in that same neighborhood, by my last count, when I looked at some aerials for this area, there's still about 70 houses in the project area that folks have said, I'm sticking it out. I'm elevating my building, or I'm just going to deal with the flooding, or I'm slightly above where the flooding is, and I'm going to stick it out. And for me, and I'm just speaking as a planner personally, not for Town of Warren here, I think that our first moves when we talk to communities about retreat and about relocation have to be voluntary. And later, as risk changes, as we know more about climate impacts, that may change because risk becomes more dire. But right now, with these areas, we're having a lot of success just in having discussions about voluntary buyout programs, get them enabled, and those who want to participate. There's great there's a lot of great writing on this, that essentially after you do your first 10 or 20 buyouts and people see that it works, more people will start to participate in the program. The first couple are the hardest because it's hard to imagine this world you've always known, this neighborhood you've always known changing. But once it starts to happen, people start to participate more.
Thank you, Arnold. We'll go to Matt again.
Yeah, those comments brought up an interesting thought for me. And I agree, it's voluntary is great at the beginning, but it brings up an interesting thought. Is the town, how does it work in Rhode Island? Because here, part of the problem the town has, I'm a select board member, is we're responsible for the services and the roads and everything. And so people are saying,
Yes.
gee whiz, you know, you can't take my road away, take care of my road, fix my road. And we've had one area, Sheep's Pond, where we've moved it twice.
Yep.
And we're not even allowed to better it. You know, ended up in court and we couldn't
Yep.
better it. And Sheep's Pond is a dirt road. It's, you know, great. It's not expensive, but we're dealing with, you know, real roads with real money and lots of expenses. How'd you square that up?
Yeah, so I will say it has not been a huge part of our discussion. We have talked about the retreat of the utilities and we've priced all that out. I point to a couple of cases, and I'm not a lawyer, so I want to be clear about that. There are a couple of cases that have been going through in North Carolina on some of the barrier islands that are a little more advanced in this. And we're talking about paved roads with utilities underneath and electric poles running alongside that have serviced 20, 30 properties further down the barrier beach. They have continued to flood out with storm events. And I know that there was a case percolating its way, I believe, through state Supreme Court. I don't think it was federal. And it was about that very question of, you have to service my property, right? That is part of my bundle of rights as a property owner, is that you are going to have to service my property. And I can't say that I've read any of the briefs submitted for or the arguments submitted for the case, but I think that we're going to see some precedent cases come out that begin to question, what is the obligation of a municipality to service a property, or a utility to service a property that faces repetitive loss, and where service just might become physically impossible, when that sewer line or that water line can't be maintained anymore. Is it that the road must be elevated, or is there some kind of a diminution of tax payments because that service is no longer part of the portfolio of service? I'm stepping out of my area of expertise, but I think it's a legal question that's going to come up for us, those of us who are working in climate adaptation, of where does that property owner's right of service begin, and where does the municipality's repetitive loss and fiscal efficiency begin?
Thank you, Arnold. Any other commissioners with questions for Arnold? So one thing that comes to mind, and I realize that the economic situation in Warren, Rhode Island is very different than on Nantucket, but what we do here a lot is move houses.
Yeah.
Was that part of the conversation in Warren?
It was, and on a case-by-case basis, we looked at it, and it's very hard. First off, you need a landing zone that is fairly low density that can take those, sort of a single-family house lot, or can take a two-family house. And then you've got the economics of moving it, which is generally tied to the wires and moving that. And it just doesn't make any sense. We don't have any receiving zones for those relocated structures that are anywhere within a mile of the site. And so the decision that the town made was to say, we'd rather do the buyouts of these. The existing structure itself does not have historic value, is not enormously valuable as an up-to-code housing unit. And so we're going to let them go with the idea that we're going to create these other kinds of housing units that are located up in the Metacom Avenue corridor, but that also that the private market is still in both Warren and the surrounding communities, which have a lot of suburban development, are still going to be able to provide that same type of single, two-family housing product to those who wish to relocate, right? It's not that it doesn't exist. You just have to go find its equivalent someplace else on higher ground. So that moving has not been a big part of the discussion.
Great. Well, I think this is a really interesting project, not one that we can replicate exactly on Nantucket, but certainly one that we can learn from and take inspiration from.
And Mary, I really wanted to just hit this last slide because I had a great conversation with Mary and Leah before the call, just to prep me and sort of get me ready. And I think that if anything they took out of this that maybe does go across to, to Nantucket, although you're doing amazing work on the lead for the country anyway. But I think one of the things that we found was that, we've really used our target audience as part of data generation, that they've been a part of telling us about their problems, telling us about the key issues. And they've helped create the options. That's been very much a public workshop kind of a thing. And I think that always works. But I think the most important thing we did was we teamed with Union Studio Architects on this. And they, along with our GIS experts, were able to take this climate adaptation stuff is really complex. And if you look at those NOAA charts, if you look at some of the graphics, we needed to make this applicable to both the lived lives of our audiences. So what does flooding mean? What does it look like? But also we had great graphics to tell the story. There's a lot of that in your prior projects I've seen, but I would just reiterate that that's been huge for us. And that every one of our decision options, the biggest thing we did that we heard from people is, I didn't know what would happen if I did nothing. And so we built a no build option and we calculated all the costs. If Warren did nothing, what would be the repetitive loss? What would be the businesses shut down? What would be the number of worked days lost? What would be the number of trips delayed or stopped because of roadway closures? And we quantified all that. For both people, but also for dollars. And that got people off their bottoms and thinking about action, because it was like, oh, we can't do that no build thing. We've got to do the change. And then we've set last thing I'd say, we set expectations for incremental, long-term, and constant. That's been our mantra, is that don't expect change in 5 years. This is a 10, 20, 30, 40-year process. And so we got to stick with it for the long term. Sorry, that's my soapbox.
Thank you, Arnold. Last call for questions from commissioners. I will ask if there are members of the public here that want to ask Arnold a question about this project. Go ahead and use the raise hand feature if you do have a question. All right, I am not seeing anyone. So again, Arnold, thank you very much. I'm sorry we couldn't bring you to Nantucket. You could return, but hopefully you will get a chance to come back at some point.
Molly and I come out every year, so we will try to find our way out there in the fall. Great.
Well, again, thank you. I really appreciate your ability to come here and show us the project. It's some great work, and we love to see it.
And thank you guys for being volunteers and working on this. It's a place we really care about, and I really appreciate your putting in your time on this to keep Nantucket. Great. Thanks. All right, have a good one.
All right, next item on our agenda is continued discussion on the best next steps for the Sconset Bluff Coastal Resilience. There was not a packet to bring us back to where we started. Leah, can you go ahead and put up page 210 of the Coastal Resilience Plan, which is the strategy overview for the Sconset area. And while we're doing that, so the goal of the homework assignment at the last meeting was to provide me with some direction on how to start this discussion and where to take it, and to have me attempt to create a statement that was just a first draft. It is not expected to be final. We have a number of options ranging from we will not generate a statement to to creating a statement with as much detail as we are comfortable as a group including, which could be very little or a lot. So that there's no constraint yet on the options, but I do appreciate those who are able to send a submission. I will say they ranged all over the place. Some were very short, some were very long. People touched on various different aspects of the project out there. So it was challenging to review them. And so I came up with a fairly short statement that we can take a look at. Leah, can you switch your view from 4 pages to 1 page so we can get a better, and none of those is the page I'm looking for. It's 210 on my PDF. It says strategy. Oh, there it is right there. Okay. So just to briefly summarize what's on this screen. Oh, that's even better. Thank you, Leah, for zooming in. It talks about erosion from Codfish Park up north, and separates, there are 4 recommendations in the Coastal Resilience Plan: dune restoration for Codfish Park, dune restoration for the area north of Codfish Park and south of the active erosion zone where the bluff is in danger. For the bluff itself in that area, it refers to the Baxter Road long-term planning study. And then there was also a suggestion that we look at some sort of wave energy dissipation in an offshore project. So those, that's the setting from the Coastal Resilience Plan, and I also looked at that as I was developing the statement. I'm going to pause. Are there any questions from commissioners about what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it at this point? Okay. So Leah, would you go ahead and put up the draft statement, and we'll see what people think about that. All right, so I had 3 paragraphs. Great, you can see them all on the screen. And again, my apologies for not sending this until after hours last night. Better late than never, but I certainly had hoped to get it to you much sooner. So do we have comments? Anyone want to start the discussion? And again, we have a full range of options open to us, so happy to take anyone's comment. Matt?
Yeah, I think before we start talking about this, I think it is important. I think you just asked, like, what is it we're trying to do? And I think that's kind of a key question. And I think, when I look at this, we're making a statement. Why are we making a statement? What do we want it to do? And it's interesting that it follows such detailed, good planning. And I think, is that, and I look at it and go, is that coming from crack? Are we going to be the planners, or is that coming from Vince and Leah? Or is that supposed to come out of the planning office? Or are the Board of Selectmen supposed to hire somebody? Like I'm in the middle, I'm in the belly of the beast here. I'm in the middle of all this. And I'm asking because what we just saw is what, if we were doing a 10-year, 20, 30 year and had that laid out with all the things he just described, we might not be kind of in the contentious situation we're in. And so my thing is, how do we, are we, I don't have the answer, but it just sort of hits me that how are we going to, interact with the public, interact with the boards, and get in place, sort of clear, understandable, paths that people can rally around. So I'm sorry, I'll think about it, but I'd like, I have that for discussion now. And is that the goal of this, is that the goal of this letter, or one of the goals?
All right, so I will try and respond. I want to preface it by saying that I don't have any pride of authorship on this. This is a facilitation tool, this statement. And I'm also not trying, or I hope I'm not being perceived as trying to tell the commission what to do or the committee what to do. But to attempt to answer Matt's question, I'm going to go back to basics. The Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee was created to advise the select board. So I don't know that we are really speaking directly to the public, except that obviously we're well aware that the public will receive the statement as well as the select board. There are groups that are directly involved, which I acknowledged in the first paragraph of this, and they are the ones, in my opinion, that should be driving the decision-making process. And we are creating this or choosing not to create this directly in response to your request, Matt, that we consider doing something. So again, we have the option of not making a statement if we feel that it is not appropriate for us to do that. And that is something that was raised by some committee members as a point to consider. So I just want to stress that is on the table as well as any other statement that we might want to make. Matt, is that helpful? Or do you want to?
A little bit, or Leah, or, maybe Leah or Vince could talk, because what is it like? Because I think we could be, I'm pick on Baxter Road, we could go around and around, bouncing it from each other, and I'm not claiming you're saying to do that, or I am, Mary. I'm trying to, sort of have a bit of a discussion about how are we going to get to the level of detail we just saw. And it was a really good presentation for us to see prior to talking about this, because I think it's showing it's showing some of the gaps. I'm watching, listening to him, and I'm thinking, geez, can we buy him? Can we hire him and bring him here? So I just think that's the, I would hope that whatever CRAC does, I hope it would be sort of advising us and pushing us to get this, sort of into the government somehow, get that level of detail, that level of analysis, in public meetings, including the public in 2 or 3 meetings, and get people in like DPW, like Rob did with the sidewalks downtown. They were amazing. And it led to great stuff quickly. And I look at that, and that's a great example. Warren's a great example. How do we do that? So anyway, that's why I'm asking for sort of people's opinions, and, can we tweak the letter to point us in that direction in some way? I don't know.
Okay. One other thing I meant to mention is that we also have the Coastal Resilience Plan as a guiding document, and we want to consider that any statement that we make, if it is not reflective of the statements in the Coastal Resilience Plan, we probably need to explain why. So just that additional background information. I am thrilled to see so many hands up, so we will try and go through everybody's comments. Carl?
Yeah, I just, Jennifer mentioned last meeting, from what I interpreted, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, the CRP has hashed this out with the consultants and come up with recommendations for the bluff. I'm sort of getting at, maybe we don't have to do anything because it's already been done. I don't know if people are agreeing with that. I certainly would welcome a new statement from CRAC to the select board and the Concom, etc. But the question that I have as a new member of this group, haven't we done this already with the CRP, with consultants to produce the document and recommendations for the road and the bluff? So I'm just saying, do we need to do this at all? Jennifer, maybe you can speak to this. My interpretation of what you said last meeting was we've already kind of done this. And what kind of a message do we produce to the select board primarily? And Matt, you're at ground zero with this. You have been for years. You've got a lot more experience than I do, but do we need to do this letter at all? Because isn't the CRP already done it with consultants? Thank you.
Jen, do you want to respond?
I certainly can. Thank you, Mary. And thanks, Carl. I think you kind of did summarize what I have been thinking about this process, is that we've worked through getting the CRP together, which has broad and staged recommendations. And one of those was for this particular Sconset Bluff project, to hire a consultant that would then work through alternatives analysis. That's happened. So that is kind of my perception of our role as the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. Is that would be my recommendation for any other area on the island, is to look to the CRP, hire your consultants who are your experts, and then have your alternatives that you can then assess. If there's space for us to have more comments in there, but on this, it seems, on this particular project, it seems all the information is out there. It's just figuring out the logistics of taking the steps and how the town finds ownership of which steps they're going to put before the public. From a coastal resilience standpoint, I don't necessarily see further comment. I could see other areas of the island, other neighborhoods that haven't done the next consultant step, where we could potentially have more input on it. And then, Matt had other stuff, but I can come back in after everyone else has had their comments. But yeah, thanks, Carl. I think that did pretty much sum up what I've been thinking about this process.
Thank you, Jen. We'll go to Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. When I raised my hand, it was before I heard anybody else, but it was basically echoing what Carl and what Jen just said. The statement I submitted to Mary was basically word for word from the CRP, because I really think, as everyone's saying, we already went through all this, and unless there's a specific question asked of us, like, what do you guys think about this? Like a very specific question, I feel like it's kind of redundant to go through it all over again, because while we have learned a lot on this committee, none of us are in particular experts on this one thing. And that this is where we rely on the expertise of consultants and engineers and people who have studied, whether or not we move the road or where we move the road and the different scenarios. And so I think, to Matt's point too, like spending time on this statement, which basically already exists because we've gone through all this and we've agreed on it as a committee. I think it's sort of reinventing the wheel. And I think that, I think unless it's being asked specifically of us, I think that doing a statement like this doesn't necessarily go anywhere. And so I think that both moving forward with either something that hasn't been done or something that is a specific ask of us from the select board. And then to what Matt said about the expertise and the example from Warren, I had the same thoughts yesterday at the coastal conference, and we heard people from Martha's Vineyard where there was a lot more action orientation and specific action with specific leads called out for each of those goals. And so I think I agree with Matt. I don't know how we get to that exact spot, but I think that would be a wonderful role for us to take on, is maybe help identify what those actions can be, and then get consultants or people with those specific areas of expertise.
Thank you, Sarah. Gary?
Thank you, Mary. Well, I happen to like very much, Mary, the way you have summarized these various views. But it is pursuant to what others have just said before me. This isn't very much different than what our coastal resiliency plan says anyway. When I look at coastal resiliency issues, I always have my 3 categories, which I'll keep reminding you all. When we look at what's going on the island, we have to decide either to defend, adapt, or manage retreat. And the coastal resiliency plan very clearly says, with respect to Sconset Bluff, it's a managed retreat. Managed retreat is the strategy. And so this is really just confirming what that plan said in its original context. There's been a lot of discussions by the groups meeting on Sconset Bluff, but at the end of the day, the coastal resiliency plan said this is one of those where we have to manage retreat, and that's what we should be doing. And I think this is just a reminder to the select board that, let's keep doing what the plan says. Manage retreat. We should try to do it as carefully as possible. Look at ways to reduce the impact of erosion and storm damage. But at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to save Sconset Bluff. It's going to continue eroding over the years, and that's because nature's going to do that to us. So I think this is a good statement to just confirm what the CRP already says.
Thank you, Gary. Christy?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think being a coastal matter, it's okay for us to make a comment, and but I don't know to what extent we would want to get bogged down into the big picture. But I think it's okay for us to sort of be on the sidelines making some comments. But I think this is well drafted. But it's just that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Christy. Rachel?
Thank you, Mary. I agree with much of what was said. I think the Coastal Resiliency Plan really nicely sums up what should be done in this area. I also agree that I don't think it's an entirely bad thing for CRAC to make a statement that basically says we support the Coastal Resiliency Plan and believe this is the direction that we should go in. The other thing that I would bring up, and I think I heard Matt alluding to this, but I'm not exactly sure, is that The Coastal Resiliency Plan to me is a high level document, which is going to require more in-depth study for certain areas. So saying that it's written into the Coastal Resiliency Plan, I don't think answers all the questions. And I do think there's gaps in the knowledge at Baxter Road and, you know, other places where we haven't even begun this process. I think there's opportunities to try and fill in those gaps so that we are making the best informed choices. I'm not sure that we do have all the information at Baxter Road, but I do think that we've come far enough that it's time to move forward with what we have. And I would just say going forward, maybe there's additional things and additional modeling that needs to be done and studies that need to be finalized in order to really understand some of the dynamics. And again, I'm not 100% sure that that is the role of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, but perhaps it's just to advise that more information might be needed at a site. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to go to Joanna.
Hi, Mary. I'm going to support what others have said, which is I do feel like this is redundant and I'm not sure this is a necessary thing. And if we were going to proceed forward with the letter, I would like it to refer back to the Coastal Resiliency Plan and keep it as simple as possible. And also, I agreed with what Sarah said about having a more action-oriented list of topics or things that we can push forward, because this is, I mean, I have Baxter Road fatigue, right? As I'm sure many people do. And I don't know that us adding anything to the conversation is going to change the outcome or influence the outcome. So thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. I do see Matt's hand up, but we've heard, I think, from everyone. Jen, I want to give you the opportunity to add comments since you were only responding previously, but then I'm going to pause discussion for a second while I do something else. Jen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. A little bit of a follow-up to what Rachel said, because I do agree with some of her statements for sure about us having a role when there's data or information missing that we think should be useful in a place. I think with this particular project, we could ask for a lot more things, you know, maybe do a sediment transport study to really know the usefulness of having sediment out there and how we could maintain something longer term than what it is, or how much the town's going to have to pay to put sediment out there. There are questions. And maybe that's where we should think about putting any letter forward. Although at this point in time for this particular project, it's hard to think of a way to encourage more information to be gathered before a decision is being made. You know, it feels like there's been a lot of iterations of this where the best recommendation from maybe our standpoint is, as we've kind of said, to follow what your consultants have told you to do out on this site, unless we saw something really egregious. That's where I think it would make sense for us to weigh in. I think we have sent statements to the select board before that have encouraged them to look at the coastal resilience plan or focus on these pieces of the coastal resilience plan. So we could reiterate it again in a letter like this. I do just kind of feel that it's already been done a little bit. Maybe it doesn't hurt, as others have said. I do think when it comes to other pieces of the CRP, when other neighborhoods come up, other recommendations come up, absolutely, I think our role is to say, here's where you need to do more work. Here's the broad overview recommendation of the CRP, but we don't know enough to implement that yet. So here's where we would suggest putting more resources or more effort. But I think on this particular piece, we've kind of already followed that pathway where the CRP recommendation was there and more additional information has been achieved. And we're probably at the point that we just need to start having action happen at this location.
Thank you, Jen. All right, so I'm going to, Leah, can you take the screen share down for a minute? I'm going to ask if there are any committee members who want to make a motion that we close discussion on this topic and do not send a statement. I want to make sure that it is the committee's decision to move forward. So is there anyone who wants to make that motion? And then there will be further discussion if the motion is made and seconded. Carl?
I'll make that motion, Madam Chair.
Okay, do we have a second?
I would second that.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. All right, so further discussion, the motion is to simply not send a statement and to close the discussion for now on this topic. Is there anyone who wants to address that motion? And I've got some hands up from before. I'm just going to ask you to let me know verbally if you have a comment, because I've still got 3 hands up and I think they're artifacts.
I'm not an artifact.
Okay,
I'm old, Mary.
yeah, Matt, go ahead.
But no, if we drop it today, that's probably fine. But I think, if you've read my comments, I think there's some major issues that we're going to have to deal with here and everywhere else. That it's not going to be consultants alone that are going to get us where we need to get. There needs to be public engagement. There needs to be 2 or 3 meetings initially in location, like they were talking about in Rhode Island, and who's gonna, if we aren't recommending this kind of process to the select board, to everybody, is it going to happen? If it doesn't happen, we're going to have a lot of SBPFs. We're going to have a lot of Baxter roads that take longer than they could or should, that we don't get buy-in, we don't get, how we, and some of the things at Baxter Road that I think about is how, if we do something, who pays for it and how do we pay for it? And so there's a lot of details here that if this committee is not tackling them, who is? I look at this committee as the sort of the most involved in the, in the most organized and tracking what's being done, more so than just about anywhere, as well as the Concom, Vince and those guys. So, but I think that somehow, I think it was Sarah said, maybe we should be putting an action plan together, action goals, what is our, and increase our role there. And I agree with that. And so somehow something's missing right now. And I don't, the letter to the select board is probably not going to change that unless we can say specifically what we need to do, which I think we just heard. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Matt. Gary?
Well, with respect to the motion, I don't mind talking about it, but I'm not in favor of not saying something to the select board. And I think that the statement you put together is a good summary. As I said before, it kind of confirms the path we're on with respect to the original plan and what we've heard and thought about. And it just says, keep going, we're doing the right thing. And that statement talks about the groups continuing to get together to reduce the impact of the continuing erosion, but continuing to plan for the alternative Baxter Road route. And I don't think we should say nothing to the select board. I think they deserve to hear from us that says we'd like the process and the recommendations of the Coastal Resiliency Plan to continue going forward as indicated.
Thank you, Gary. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. Is there anyone else who has a comment specifically about the motion? And let me clarify that when we go to a vote, if you vote yes, you will be voting to stop discussion for now. Again, just ending this several month-long topic that we've had, which is not to say it can't come back in another forum or we can't talk about any of the details in the future. And if you vote no, you will be voting to continue discussion today and in the future until we reach a point where we have a statement that we agree we want to send to the select board.
That's not what your motion said, Mary.
I'm sorry, help me out, Gary.
Your motion, the motion you made said, we're going to stop talking now and we're not going to send a comment to the select board.
Right, so if we vote for the motion, that is what will happen. If we vote against the motion, we can continue talking now and in the future. Is that clear?
Can you say that again, Mary? So I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, so the motion was to stop talking about this now, to close discussion on this subject, and to not send a statement. And so if we vote yes, that is what we will do. If we vote no, we will continue talking about this now and potentially in the future until we reach a point where we have a statement that we agree we want to send to the select board.
Well,
In my mind, the topic is, do we want to send a statement to the select board about this project?
Got it.
That's
Thank you.
Rachel has a hand up and then Christy.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I was hoping for the stop talking about this topic and send a statement to the select board option.
me too.
Okay.
As a form of action based on what we have discussed now for a period of, many months. So even
Okay.
if it's repetitive. Thank you.
So I'm trying to separate those, and I hear you that you want them together. So the way that we would accomplish that would be, I need Sarah Alger here, would be to vote no right now to stop talking. And then we will continue our discussion today. And we can then, if somebody wants to make a motion, move to send a statement, assuming that we can agree on the statement that we're going to send. So I think it's a two-part, two-step process that you're interested in, Rachel and Gary.
Yes,
I don't think that voting on this motion precludes the outcome that you're looking for. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Christy.
Yeah, I concur with Rachel and Joanna in the respect that I do have Baxter Road fatigue big time. I think we probably all do. But I do think it's the right thing. I do think it's the right thing to do for this committee at this time, just updating our interest in the matter.
Thank you, Christy. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Not to be redundant myself, I don't think we need a huge statement. I just think it's important I think we do have to send something if, we're having all this discussion, but I think it needs to just be like reiterating, follow the CRP at this point, because yes, it's high level, but I don't think this committee are prepared to be nitty gritty about our recommendations for what should happen at Baxter Road. So what I was saying before doesn't preclude sending something, because we've already said we're going to, and have been talking about this for a while. So I would support Rachel and Gary in voting no for continuing discussion, but yes for sending a statement of some sort that is as simple as possible.
Okay, so we're going to take a vote, and the vote again, yes stops the discussion and does not send a statement. No does not stop the discussion and leaves open the possibility of sending a statement, which would be the subject of further discussion, if that helps. Are you ready? Okay, Gary.
no,
Let me pause. Leah, could you write down how many votes we have in each direction?
Oh.
All right, so we have one vote no for Gary. Next person, Carl.
No.
Sarah?
No.
Peter's not here. Matt?
No.
Rachel?
Nope.
Jen?
No,
Christy?
No.
Joanna?
No,
And I'm just going to abstain because I don't even know what the vote is right now. So thank you for the very clear direction that we do want to continue discussion. Now, does anyone else want to make a motion? Do we want to return to the statement? Leah, would you pop that back up? Gary?
I'm happy to make a motion to accept your statement, the one that you drafted, which is just all it does is really reaffirm what the CRP has said all along, that there should be continued discussion on the details of how we deal with this, but that the coastal resiliency plan objective is to keep going to find a alternative for the Baxter Road relocation.
Okay, so Gary has a motion to accept the statement as written and send it to the select board. Is that a correct summary, Gary?
Correct.
Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Carl. Discussion on that motion. And again, we always have the option of voting this down in order to continue discussing further. So discussion on Gary's motion. Matt?
Yeah, no, I think there's a couple changes I would want in that statement, and I think, so I'd like to, there's one that talks about second paragraph. Against relying on such structures, that I think we'd have to clean that up a little bit, because we may have to rely on some of them short term to get to the long-term relocation. And that, that has been what Arcadis has told us. And so I think that, and sort of that's been laid out a couple different ways, and they warn us about taking it out right away. So I think that we have to change that a little bit. And I also would like to add importance of a process. I think we all just learned a lot in this last presentation about how that community was able.
Yeah. So
that I'd like that stuff considered further too. I'd like to keep it short and sweet, but add that too.
So in the interest of time, let's not try and rewrite the statement before we vote whether or not to rewrite the statement. Is there any further discussion on accepting the statement as is, or continuing to examine the statement for potential changes? Sarah?
I think that we have to, if we're going to use the statement, then we have to discuss it in great detail and pick apart language, because if it comes from the crack committee, I think we have to be very careful about the language, because we know that other people will pick it apart, and like to Matt's point about the specific terms that we use. And so while my overall idea is to be more simple and point to the higher level statement we already have in the CRP, if we're going to use this statement, I think that we need to heavily discuss it, unfortunately.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so we can go to a vote. The motion is to accept and send the statement as written, or to continue discussion and edit the statement. So yes, accepts it and sends it. No, continues discussion. Does anybody have any questions about the yes and the no?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
Suppose we just took out that middle paragraph.
That would be editing the statement, and so we would do that after we vote.
Okay, well, okay.
Yeah. So
We
I
can
mean,
amend it.
we have to
We
stick
could
with
amend it. I could amend my motion.
You're killing me, Gary. All right, so on the motion to accept as is and send, voting yes does that, voting no continues discussion. Gary?
Yes.
Sarah?
No.
Carl? And Leah, I hope you're writing these down again.
Yes.
Matt?
No.
Rachel?
I don't want to ask. No.
Jen?
No.
Christy?
No,
Joanna?
No,
And I'm also abstaining on this one. So Leah, I think the noes have it. Can you give us the count?
There's 2 yeses and 6 noes.
Okay. So we are continuing discussion. We can edit the statement. It's 11:25, so we do have some time remaining. This does not have to be finished today. There is the potential to finish it at any point in the future, but hopefully at our next meeting. Comments on how to edit, Matt?
Why don't we push this over into the next meeting and let us all sleep on it? And so I'll make a motion to continue this into the next meeting and have us come back with our thoughts.
Okay, second for that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Jen. All right, I'm hoping there's no further clarification needed on that motion. Does anybody have a question before we go to a vote? Okay, so the motion is to continue the discussion to our next meeting. Gary?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
Carl?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Rachel? Rachel, are you able to unmute?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Christie,
Aye.
Joanna?
Aye.
I will vote aye on that one. Thank you. I really appreciate the ability to get clear direction from the committee on this. It was, I did not want to be the person driving the discussion. I really wanted this to be a committee led effort. So I appreciate that we are doing that. Okay, Leah, can you stop the screen share? And our next agenda item is public comments. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment at this time? Go ahead and use the raise hand feature. Deanne Atherton.
Yes, Mary, thank you. I just would like to remind the committee of the Baxter Road long-term planning memo, which was issued in October of 2021. It was completed, I think, before the Coastal Resilience Plan, and it was relevant to Rachel's comments. It was a much lower level look at the Baxter Road situation. And page 53 of that memo has a very specific pathway forward for short-term, midterm, long-term action plans. So I think if you looked at that, it would inform your thinking on this issue.
Thank you, Deanne.
Thank you.
We did mention that at the very beginning of the discussion. Excuse me. But thank you for the reminder as well at the end. It was a long discussion.
Thanks.
Any other members of the public with a comment at this time? All right, not seeing anyone. Next item on the agenda, updates and announcements. So the Coastal Zone Management Coastal Resilience Grant Program request for proposals was released. Leah, can you give us a brief outline of what we are doing with that grant program?
Yeah, sure. So just as a reminder, we're going to resubmit the first phase of the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. And Vince got some great feedback when he put it in last year. And I was speaking to Steve McKenna, who's our regional manager, actually yesterday about it. So we will, that's due July 11th, I believe. So I'll be working on that. And also reaching out to Arcadis because they had written the original one with Vince to see if we need to update the budget or, you know, other specific areas within the grant.
Great. Any questions on that for Leah? No? Okay. Next item is approval of the minutes from April 25th. Leah, can you put those up on the screen? All right, so I believe this was Rachel that provided the minutes. Thank you, Rachel. Any comments, questions, corrections for the minutes? All right, if there are none, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Carl. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Sarah. Roll call vote, Gary Beller,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Rob Orchard,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Abstain, I haven't read them yet.
okay, Rachel Freeman,
Aye.
Jen Carberg,
Aye.
Christy Kickham,
Aye.
Joanna Roach,
Aye.
Mary Longacre, aye. Next item on the agenda, New Business Committee and Natural Resources Department reports. So there have been a number of events so far this month. Yesterday, the Coastal Conference, Leah and Vince were both presenters there. I am so sorry that the recording of that conference was not top quality. It is available on the town's YouTube channel at that link, but unfortunately there was internet connectivity problems and many of the presentations were chopped up. And most unfortunately, Leah's is almost non-existent. So we're so sorry, Leah. Leah, you want to tell us what happens at the conference?
Hi, Mary. Yeah, we had a lot of, unfortunately, technical difficulties. The internet went out multiple times. You know, sometimes the sound wasn't working from people's presentations. So NCTV did say that they will go in the next couple of days and edit it so that it is a little bit more cohesive and the slides do go with what the presenters were talking about. So hopefully there will be a better version on that link in the next couple of days.
That would be great. Did anyone else attend the conference and want to provide their inputs? I think Jen and Sarah were also presenters.
Yeah, I
Jen?
thought it was a really great conference. Leah did a great job in a short amount of time of pulling it together, and there were a lot of people there from a lot of it was packed. So it was great to see a lot of different community members there. There were definitely interesting talks from the Martha's Vineyard Commission, and how they're how active the commission is as far as motivating collaboration between not just town departments, but also giving responsibility to conservation groups and private groups and things like that when it comes to climate action, sustainability, and coastal resilience. So there were definitely some interesting pieces to take away from other communities.
Yeah, and Vince made the point that the fastest way to get Nantucket to do something is to say that Martha's Vineyard's already doing it. So I did email Liz Turkey, the Martha's Vineyard's climate action planner, and say thank you for offering all those ideas for us to steal. Yeah. Other comments about the conference? Vince, did you want to add anything?
Yep. So the talks yesterday were of very high quality, and I just wanted to say thanks to everyone. Jen, Joanna, and Rachel all presented. Joanna presented as well yesterday, and just to give a shout out to Leah for doing the bulk of the organizing, and just give her the big thanks for the day.
Thank you, Leah. Okay. We also have, we had an emerging governance structure for climate resilience conference that Leah, you attended, I think. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So I attended, and I think Matt attended as well. It was great. I learned a lot. So they had a hybrid option and also in person, and they said it was the first time that the hybrid and the in-person were equal in participation. So what I got out of it was there was a senator from Maryland, and they passed, it's called Bill 457, Resilience Authorities. So it is a mechanism for these authorities to issue bonds to serve as a vehicle to fund critical infrastructure. And you can dedicate the specific money for specific coastal resilience plans. It does have to have a board. It's kind of essentially a nonprofit, and it requires annual reporting to the Senate and to the House. They cannot raise taxes, but they can charge fees and exercise eminent domain. The bill was passed in 2020, and I think one of the counties is already using it. And then they had someone speaking from Sonoma County. They were doing some highway resilient projects and disaster recovery. So there was actually one area, let me try to find it. Yeah, in Sonoma, that one of the rivers kept flooding and flooding out the houses. So there were, FEMA actually came in and said, you either can't rebuild here, or you need to, your homes need to be adapted. And so that was really the mechanism for them to like start retreating away from the river. There was another example of, in the middle of the country, they're actually retreating to higher ground, which, when I think coastal resilience, I think, of course, of the coast, but they are having to retreat in the middle of the country as well. So that was kind of a cool perspective to put on that. Another thing that I really liked that came out of it in Maryland, they have actually produced maps of the coast where, living shorelines or nature-based solutions are either likely, unlikely, or I forgot what the other option was, but I thought that would be great to have for Nantucket to show, around the whole island. Is this specific area? Should we do a living shoreline there, or should we not? Depending on wave action and all of that.
Right. Matt?
Yeah, the last that Leah was talking about was the one that struck me, and it wouldn't be that difficult. It was, so they're laying out, you can look at a map and it tells you, sort of, we'll never do it. We might do it, we're gonna definitely do it, so the steamship, we would have, a definite, we're gonna definitely do something here, and here's what we're gonna do. And I think it would start to set expectations. I think it would help people realize they're in an area that, we're going to discourage much of anything being done long term. And if you're in another area, it was really, I thought it would be great for us. It was something for us to talk about and think about. And then the coastal resiliency that they did in Maryland, basically is sort of what the coastal resiliency district I talk about, and I'm hoping that we can do it somehow through betterments or through some other mechanism that exists in Massachusetts law for us here, because we are not, as a community, we are not going to be able to put this on the tax base and do everything we need to do in a fair manner. And so I think that's another issue that was going to have to be tackled. I hope it's, and fairly soon. And so that was interesting that state has already taken it. It seemed to me like the woman that spoke, and I can't remember her name, but it seemed to me like she really was involved and really had to push to even have it happen there, which is, Maryland has got a ton of shoreline and a ton of low lying that's in a lot of danger, and they're gonna have a lot of impacts. But she really, it sounded like she was talking about everything she had done, and it sounded like she really had done a good job to get it. I hope something similar happens in Massachusetts if we can't find a way to fix it, a way to do districts within existing law. I hope that we get the tools to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Any other comments on that conference? There was an in-person meeting for the Harbor Action Plan. Peter would be happy to give us a report, but he was unable to attend today. Was there anybody else at that meeting? Leah and Sarah.
Hi, Mary. Yeah, I was sitting at the table with Peter. We were the coastal resilience table. So there were, ideas from the public ranging from putting kind of, I guess, sunken ships offshore on the shoreline, to living shorelines, to increased oyster restoration. So they are compiling all of those notes, and I think the next meeting is in August. So I assume they'll be presenting there. But yeah, there were some great ideas from the public, and it was kind of just a generating ideas forum.
And Sarah?
Yeah, thanks. I know Jen was there too, and maybe others from this group, but I did not sit at the coastal resiliency table because I feel like I have a pretty good, input here, I guess. And it was also a very crowded table, so I kind of hopped around. And what was really interesting, hopping around to the different tables, because how they worked it out was the different tables were sort of different types of topics for people to discuss. There was a lot of input on the working waterfront, on boat access, on more emergency hazard things. So lots of things that we talk about at different times. But it was really great to see, because if you remember from our CMP days of the public comment were all virtual. And so this was really nice to actually see people all getting together and kind of having input and having just getting that higher level list of things. So it was because of with this committee, we sit in that coastal resiliency realm. It was nice to hear what some of the comments were from other people too, about a lot of boating access to the harbor, and more more moorings and ways to take boats in and out, and enforcement of Chapter 91, and just really, it was really interesting. And then just for anyone else who didn't get to participate that wants to, there's I think at least 3 or 4 more built-in times, and as Leah said, August is sort of the next time. So I would encourage anyone else to go.
Thank you, Sarah. Leah again?
I forgot to mention too that in the updated plan, coastal resilience obviously will be added, and it wasn't really in the prior plan. So I think that's really important to have community engagement, and also the board as well during these planning processes.
Great. And then there was also the Conservation Commission public hearing on the wetlands regulation update. Ian Golding would happy to give us a report on that. And again, he's unable to attend today. Is there anybody else who wants to speak about that public hearing? All right, if not, we'll ask Ian to give us an update next time. All right, any other updates for new business or reports of activities from the members or the Natural Resources Department? Matt?
Yeah, just a quick comment is the Concom is generating a fair number of letters to the select board. So just so people know, people are, sort of saying what's going to happen, and it's not fair, and what, so we're already starting to get pressure on that to us, which is interesting. That's all.
Okay. Anything else? Right, last item on the agenda, discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. Our next meeting is June 27th on Zoom. Carl Borchert will be presenting the results of his investigation of a zoning review tool that's designed to review existing zoning with a lens at coastal resiliency. So we'll find out from Carl what we have here. That tool was provided by Southern New England. Oh, what are their SNEP? What is the last letter for?
Extra rice program.
Yes, thank you, Leah. And we will obviously be continuing discussion on our Sconset Bluff potential statement. As always, please feel free to send suggestions for meeting topics. I'm happy to consider those. And if there is nothing else, we will take a motion to adjourn.
We're going to continue meeting on Zoom wise.
At least for June 27th, yes. So as of June 30th, my term on the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee will be over. And the select board will appoint a replacement. I forget which day in June it is. Is it the 28th, I think?
I think so.
Yeah, so in between June 28th and July 11th, which is our next scheduled meeting after the 27th, I did tell Leah that I would provide support for the role of chair to help with the agenda for July 11th. I'm hoping nobody has any objection to that unless you want to take the role on yourself. But at the July 11th meeting, there will be new annual election of chair, vice chair, secretary, and a new member to welcome. So just heads up on that. Matt?
You are going to be sorely missed, Mary. You are really, really good. And I am scared that when you're gone, just so you know, that we are not going to be as functional as we are. So I will miss you.
Thank you, Matt. Doug, we will go ahead and take your comment. Doug Rose. Yeah.
Sorry, I was giving the thumbs up to Matt's comment.
Okay.
I wasn't asking to speak.
So FYI, Doug Rose has put in the application to take the seat that I am vacating. So I expect we'll
I would only echo Matt's point. You will be sorely missed.
Well, for whoever the new chair is, I'm happy to be a resource, but with my other commitments, I have really enjoyed the 4 years that I've spent in the chair seat, and one more meeting to come. So motion to adjourn for today.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Carl. Second.
Second.
Second from Sarah. Roll call vote. Gary Beller.
Aye.
Boyce.
Aye.
Borchert.
Aye.
Matt Fee.
Aye.
Rachel Freeman.
Aye.
Jen Carberg.
Aye.
Christy Kickham.
Aye.
Joanna Roach.
I second the comments about what a good job you've done, Mary. It's been a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you, Joanna. And I vote aye. We are adjourned.